today's video, I am going to discuss or tackle about the poetry and its elements of poetry. So first, what is poetry? Poetry is a vast subject as old as history and older, present wherever poetry is present, possibly under some definitions, the primal and primary forms of languages themselves. The present article means only to describe in as general a way as possible certain properties of poetry and of poetic thought regarded as in some sense independent modes of the mind. The article considers the difficulty and impossibility of defining poetry, man's nevertheless familiar acquaintance with it, the difference between poetry and prose, the idea of form in poetry, poetry as a mode of thought, and what title may be said in prose, the spirit of poetry. Now let's tackle about the elements of poetry. Elements of poetry can be defined as a set of instruments used to create a poem. Many of these were created 1,000 of years ago and have been linked to ancient storytelling. They help bring imagery and emotion of poetry, stories, and dramas. So the first element of poetry is the stanza. The stanza is a unit of lines grouped together, similar to a paragraph in prose. A stanza consists of two or more lines of poetry that together form one of the divisions of a poem. The stanzas on a poem are usually of the same length and follow the same patterns of meter and rhyme and are used like paragraphs in a story. Some different types of stanzas are as follows. First is the couplet. Couplet is stanzas of only two lines that usually rhyme. Example, whether or not we find what we are seeking is evil, biologically speaking, by Edna St. Vincent Millay at the end of a sonnet. So the second is tercets. Tercets is stanzas of three lines. The three lines may or may not have the same end rhyme. If all three lines rhyme, this type of tercet is triplet. Example, everyone, young or old, needs someone to listen as their stories are told. Third is the quatrain. Stanzas of four lines which can be written in any rhyme scheme. Example, come, fill the cup, and in the fire of spring, your winter garment of repentance fling. The bird of time has but a little way to flutter, and the bird is on the wing. The second element of poetry is the rhyme scheme. The pattern in which end rhyme occurs. Rhymes are types of poems which have the repetition of the same or similar sounds at the end of two or more words, most often at the ends of lines. This technique makes the poem easy to remember and is therefore often used in nursery rhymes. So, the example of these nursery rhymes are the Humpty Dumpty song.
Humpty Dumpty sat on a wall. Humpty Dumpty had a great fall. All the king's horses and all the king's men couldn't put Humpty together again.
Proceed with the third elements of poetry is the rhythm. Rhythm is the pattern of beats or stresses in a poem. Poets use patterns of stressed and unstressed syllables to create a regular rhythm. Examples, she was a child and I was a child. In this kingdom by the sea, but we loved with a love that was more than love, I and my Hannah Lee. Now let's proceed to the fourth elements of poetry, which is the rhyme. Rhyme is the repetition of the same or similar sounds, usually in stressed syllables at the end of lines, but sometimes within a line. Example, there are strange things done in the midnight sun by the men who moil for gold. So the rhyme there is the dawn and the sun. The fifth elements of poetry is the alliteration. Alliteration is the repetition of consonant sounds at the beginning of words. Example, Peter Piper picked a peck of pickled peppers. So, the sixth elements of poetry is the onomatopoeia. Words that are used to represent particular sounds. For example, crash, boom, bang, and zip. So we are now here in the last of elements of poetry, which is the imagery. Imagery represents of the five senses: the sight, taste, touch, sound, and smell. So those five senses creates mental images about a poem's subject. And that would be all. I hope you learned something from my video, and see you on my next video. Bye!
Tell me pretty lies, look me in the face. Tell me that you love me, even if it's fake.